Oh yeah, Colts Nation, hell yeah. It is about that time. What time is it? What time is it about to be? It's about to be that time of the offseason where we as fans finally start getting some answers. Like in theory, this is where things can start to get very, very exciting for Colts fans. And listen, we've had a pretty long offseason because we certainly have not had anything to root for in the month of January for a period of time, at least in a sustainable manner. Lord forbid February. Let's not even talk about the possibility of February for the Indianapolis Colts. But the thing is that up to this point, a lot of the discussion we've had about the team, and I say we kind of had a hiatus, but a lot of the discussion around the Indianapolis Colts has sort of just been like talking, like just a thought exercise, right? Because of the lack of information we've had available. It was kind of just, not that it's not speculation now, but at least it's speculation rooted in a little bit of reality, right? Because now that we are in that player re-sign period before ultimately getting to the tag deadline, which I believe is March 10th, March 11th. Doesn't really matter much for the Indianapolis Colts. Ryan Kelly would be the only guy that we have as a pending free agent that would even be up for the discussion. And the Colts are not going to franchise tag Ryan Kelly. That's not a prediction by me. I'm telling you what it is that's going to happen. The Colts will not be using the franchise tag on Ryan Kelly. Therefore, they won't be using the franchise tag this offseason. Only 7 times since the year 1993, which is before I was born by quite a few years, have they used that franchise tag. Most recently, albeit, being Michael Pittman Jr. before ultimately we paid him his contract. Now, at March 11th, at noon, teams can start talking to outside free agents, right? At the current moment, we're just in that re-sign period, and there hasn't been a whole lot of news for us. So even though those signings aren't technically going to be official till March 13th at 4 p.m., and I'm talking about the outside free agents, even though it's not official till March 13th at 4 p.m., anyone who's experienced an NFL offseason knows that these deals start breaking early, meaning we are less than a week away from starting to get those answers. That's why we're excited. Will Ryan Kelly be around? EJ Speed, Julian Blackmon. We know the Colts cut Raekwon Davis, but guys like Samson Ebukam and Braden Smith getting thrown around as cut candidates as well. It's just been talked about and talked about and talked about. But here we are at that time where any moment you could pick up your phone and look and say, whoa, something just happened. That's kind of where we're at. And just a quick prediction for you on that front. I think EJ Speed and Julian Blackmon are gone. I think Ryan Kelly basically comes down to whether or not we see Ebukam or Braden Smith get cut. I think if the plan is to keep both of them for the Indianapolis Colts, Kelly is going to be the odd man out. Essentially, it's really not even about Ryan Kelly being the odd man out. I just think when you think about dollars and cents, only 2 of those 3 can stay, if you ask me. And that's at best. There's a world where only 1 out of those 3 is on the team next year. Now, of course, that's just our guys, right? And you know how much we like our guys, but we have kind of been led on to believe from the powers that be that we may not like our guys this offseason. And we'll just find out in short order how true that is. I predict for you that if the Colts are going to be doing things differently this offseason, we're going to know very early in free agency, which is why this episode is titled the way it titles. Starting March 11th, our radar should be up as opposed to previous off seasons where the action isn't all that great. Not saying that it's going to be great this offseason, but if it is, I predict for you March 11th, March 12th, March 13th. These are going to be days where you see the Colts getting tossed around as a team that is in the action. And there are some interesting names right now in the league that are getting cut that I think can be a good fit. The Jaguars, oh, that sorry fucking franchise with those miserable, no good losers that they have as fans. Following the greatest stretch of any team in the AFC South has had since the Colts have had Peyton Manning, the Jaguars finally, after just a dynasty of the highest order, fucking idiot fans, seem to be clearing house entirely, and some really surprising names kind of being let go here, right? Evan Engram is one we're going to talk about today. Christian Kirk getting traded to Houston for a 7th-round pick. Now, a lot of you guys may get upset about that. Of course, there was all the talk last offseason about how heavy the Texans went in on free agency and whatever it is that they were doing in the offseason. It's kind of like a distant memory at this point. But do keep in mind, while bringing in Kirk, it's likely they lose Stephon Diggs. Tank Dell, I think, had MCL and ACL reconstruction, or he's getting an ACL now, and he had PCL and MCL. Point being is that guy's leg is another injury away from just falling off entirely. I mean, Tank Dell, who I think is an awesome talent, and it's not I'm rooting against his health, but I mean, at the same time, if he's not on the field, it is better for the Indianapolis Colts. So when you think about Christian Kirk going to that team and you say, how can they keep getting away with this? Do keep in mind, it's not really a guarantee that that receiver room is upgraded per se, as much as it is they were able to keep it at that base level that it is at. Devin Duvernay, a guy on the Jaguars, I think a really good gadget guy, another one being released. It's an example that the Jaguars, or one that we're seeing with the Jaguars rather, it's an example of the dark side of going bananas in free agency and the offseason. The Jacksonville Jaguars are in a really, really bad spot right now because of how aggressive they got. And yes, they had been winning some offseason Super Bowls, but as we know, the games have to be played. Like, it doesn't really matter per se what's done in the offseason, at least in terms of looking and saying, okay, we know this translates to in-season success. And one thing we know for sure, yes, you can improve in the offseason with some big signings and some big trades, and the upside can be immense when you take that approach. But on the other side, there is a ton of risk that comes with that potential reward. And when the bottom falls out in those situations, it's tough for an organization to deal with. It's tough for a fan base to deal with. And that ultimately is what the Jaguars are going through right now. And that's kind of why you see a team like the Jaguars or the Titans with the ups and the downs, like the really high highs and the really low lows. And you see a team like the Colts kind of middling. It has everything to do with the approach in the offseason. Now, whether or not that's working great for the Colts isn't the point. I suppose I'm just making a point about the trade-offs that come with the way you approach the offseason. But either way, we're going to talk about some ideas that we could be looking at right now that I'm liking going into this offseason. Trey Hendrickson, is that on the table? I think there is a reasonable path to the Colts acquiring him. And hopefully a couple other realistic ideas. But before I get ahead of myself, you know what it is? I got to introduce myself. My name is Justin. This right here is the Riding the Bench Colts podcast. As always, ask anyone watching and enjoying the show, go ahead, shoot it a like. It's going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Of course, subscribe if you want to be a part of the journey. We're on our way to 4,000 subscribers over here on the YouTube channel. We want to get there by the start of next season. So if you're enjoying what you're hearing today, if it's your first time, perhaps you keep coming back and enjoying the show and have yet to hit that subscribe button. Maybe today is the day. Audio listeners, of course, leave a five-star review. Let the people know how much you are enjoying the content that we're putting out here. Big goal for me is to grow that side of things, definitely on a gradual incline, but nowhere near the amount of viewership that we have on YouTube, if I'm being fully transparent. So if you're one of those audio people, you're early on, right? Leave a review, help more people listen to the content that it is that you're enjoying. But most importantly, let's enjoy the discussion. Let's be thoughtful in the discussion and be civil in the comment section with one another. We're allowed to disagree, but we don't want this to be toxic. We don't want this to be a disgusting space where people are getting insulted. You can take that to one of the other shows if that's what you like to do in the comment section right here. We're all about, I don't want to say inclusivity, if that's even a word, because, you know, I wouldn't consider myself much of a snowflake, but at the same time, like, let's be respectful, right? It's a fair ask, is it not? The Hoosier hospitality, that's what they call it, I think. I mean, I'm from New York. I wouldn't know much about it. We're known for being brash and loud and annoying, which, of course, you would never, of course, predict or know from listening to me talk, right? Right? Right. Okay, so back to the topic at hand. I want to talk about Evan Engram first, and more specifically, kind of the trade-off, right? The idea of an Evan Engram versus a Tyler Warren, because Tyler Warren is the guy right now that everyone is talking about at tight end for the Indianapolis Colts, and really the guy that everyone's talking about just in general. Like, sure, you have some talk about the quarterback position, but Warren is the guy that everyone is like, you have to go draft him. And I'm not saying it's a bad pick. I'm certainly not saying it's a bad pick to draft Tyler Warren. My question with Tyler Warren is this. We know, by the way, that the offseason goes. Free agency comes before the draft. So my question is, if you are the Colts, are you sure that Tyler Warren makes it to the 14th overall pick? And if you're not, do you really want to take that chance? Because he's the one guy at tight end that we want early, as opposed to the cornerback position, where there's a few guys that do project to be first-round talents. You got Will Johnson out of Michigan, Jade Burton out of Texas, or however you would pronounce his name. I'm not exactly the name-pronouncing guy. That's not my forte. Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame, of course, would be close to home for Indianapolis. We know Quentin Nelson from there as well. And Notre Dame is how far north of Indianapolis? You guys would understand the geography a little bit better than me. Point being is we've seen the Colts go with the hometown kid before. Benjamin Morrison may be an option on that front. But my point in bringing that up is you look back to last year and you think to yourself, man, how different would things potentially look for this organization right now if they had drafted Quinyon Mitchell? And that's nothing against the Latu. We like his upside, and I'm certainly not at all off the Latu train. But man, Mitchell at corner was a glaring need, or rather corner was a glaring need for us, and he was at that position, and man, was he sensational as a rookie. Immediately became essentially a shutdown corner, and the numbers would back that up. Just watching Quinyon Mitchell, my buddy Asif over at the Riding the Bench Eagles podcast, obviously a huge Eagles fan, right? Why would he have the show if not a huge fan? I had obviously a little bit more exposure to a Quinyon Mitchell in his rookie year because of him, and it just would have been a real good look for the Indianapolis Colts to have him kind of on the roster. No, on the roster. There is no kind of on the roster. You're on the roster or you're not, right? I mean, that's just the way things go. Point being is we've done a bad job drafting that position with Chris Ballard, particularly in the second round. Like you think back to guys like Quincy Wilson, Rock Ya-Sin, Juju Brents, if due to nothing else but his health. I mean, those are the three right off the top of my head. It just has not been particularly good for the Colts at that position. So do we want to take the chance there again, as opposed to going high in the draft and giving us the best possible chance to maybe succeed with the pick at the corner position, right? The idea of Evan Engram, it all comes back to Evan Engram, right? I promise it would, or did. I didn't make any promises. This is what happens when I take a hiatus. I'm like rusty on the mic over here. These things will get better as we go on. Don't you worry about it. Evan Engram plus a first-round corner, does that or does that not sound better to you than a Tyler Warren and a free agent corner? Just food for thought. Like, that's not to say that there's no options in free agency at corner, but like, would I trust a 30-year-old tight end in Evan Engram, particularly one who's been particularly productive in the past couple of years versus like a 30-year-old Darius Slay, for example? Well, yeah, I think I would, because tight ends generally age a little bit better in terms of production than corners do. Now, to be fair, there would be a case to be made on the other side for Darius Slay's pedigree and experience and the value he would bring in that way. And then would he be better than every corner we have in our room? Possibly. But he's not the guy he was. Like when you think the name Darius Slay and kind of the elite shutdown corner, the guy who was just the top, the cream of the crop for years. He's not exactly that anymore, but can he still play? Yes. So my point in bringing up Engram is, one, we know he can produce. Evan Engram was Trevor Lawrence's most reliable target when on the field last year, and particularly the year before, was absolutely sensational. We know he's having a shoulder surgery this offseason, but nothing that's supposed to linger into next year. Do we kind of like the idea of just saying, okay, grab Evan Engram and then essentially be done on the offensive side of the ball, if not for backups? Yeah, I mean, I do like that idea, and certainly like it more given the idea that you would know you have that secured before the draft. You wouldn't kind of be sitting there and praying that Tyler Warren falls to number 14. So for me, Evan Engram makes a whole lot of sense. Now, if we're to go to the defensive side of the ball, a big story to watch, in my personal opinion, is will the Colts have better luck adding to this side of the ball than they did last offseason? Because the story is going to get told like they did not try at all last offseason to add talent on the defensive side of the ball. But do remember, they did take a swing at Danielle Hunter, who ended up signing with Houston for less money than he would have gotten to come to the Indianapolis Colts. So you do wonder if the addition of smooth Lou Anarumo and his defensive philosophy and the respect he has around the league, if guys are going to be more inclined to want to come play for him than they would have been for, let's say, a Gus Bradley, right? If that even made a difference at all to begin with, just bringing it up as a potential point, right? For starters, on defense, the idea of a trade for Trey Hendrickson. We talk about the idea of a Samson Ebukam getting cut. How about Samson Ebukam being a piece in the trade for Trey Hendrickson? If you're the Bengals, it makes sense from this standpoint. You get some production back in return while losing a Trey Hendrickson. And just like Trey Hendrickson, Samson Ebukam's contract expires at the end of this upcoming season, meaning you keep that flexibility in the cap that they're looking for. And with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins still due to be paid, flexibility is something that team is looking for financially. And of course, for Indy, this makes sense because a game-changing pass rusher who can also play well against the run. 17 and a half sacks, 2 straight seasons. Yes, you'd have to worry about the contract next season, but for a guy of Trey Hendrickson's caliber, that is a pretty good problem to have, particularly knowing all that production came in smooth Lou's defense, right? That right there is just an added bonus. So Trey Hendrickson, how can you possibly be upset with the prospect of bringing him in, particularly if we feel like we have a guy in Ebukam who we can include as part of that trade to lighten the load of potential draft capital that we would have to give up for him? We don't mind that at all. Linebacker, another big one for the Indianapolis Colts going into this offseason. If you're going to let EJ Speed walk, if you're Chris Ballard, presumably it would be with the intention of upgrading that position, which is not as easy to do as many Colts fans would lead you on to believe. Like, sure, EJ Speed had moments where maybe he wasn't playing the highest level football. No one's sitting here and saying that he's Fred Warner, right? But EJ Speed is a quality football player, okay? So if you get rid of him, there's no guarantee that you upgrade from EJ Speed just because you got rid of him and brought someone else in. Now, the draft, not out of the picture, not out of the question at this position at all, particularly because the Colts have done a pretty good job drafting it overall under Chris Ballard. And you're always playing that game, right? And that's the tricky part of the offseason. You're always playing that game of balancing exactly where you need to get what, like free agency for this, draft for that. It's impossible to nail that mix down perfectly, right? That's why things are so hard to predict. And that's why so often we go into the offseason with an idea of how it's going to look, and it looks entirely different. The range of outcomes are basically never ending, right? When it comes to who they're going to sign at this position, who they're going to draft at that position, just very, very hard to keep up with. But guys like Harold Landry, Dre Greenlaw, Kazir White, Isaiah Simmons, these are just a few of the names that we should keep an eye on in free agency for the Colts to potentially bring in to replace EJ Speed. In my opinion, personally, it's sort of Dre Greenlaw than everyone else in terms of my wish list for who the Colts bring in, albeit he's coming off a major injury. It's just going to be interesting to see if there's a theme in the type of skill set that Lou is going to bring on to this defense. It's the first time in a while we're seeing the possible approach looking a bit different, right? And the question is, are they going to be looking for their starter in free agency, or are they going to be looking for their starter in the draft at the linebacker position? Because I do anticipate that they're going to hit both the draft and free agency for linebacker. It's just a question of again, where are you looking for the starter and where are you looking for the depth? Finally, at safety, if the Colts are looking to move on from Julian Blackmon, it's essentially Javon Holland or the draft, at least in terms of upgrading. That's the tricky position that the Colts are in. What do we always say about the Colts? They're certainly not the best, but they're also certainly not the worst. What you have is a lot of kind of mid-tier. You have a lot of B talent on this team. Not a lot of A's, a lot of B's. And when you look at a Julian Blackmon, you say, just like EJ Speed, you're not guaranteed to upgrade from Julian Blackmon, at least what we knew Julian Blackmon to be prior to this last season. Okay, everyone has an off season from time to time. But Julian Blackmon prior to this past season, very, very, very good safety. And we know the skill set he brings tracking the ball in the air. Like, he's a bit of a center fielder, which seemingly makes him kind of a good fit in Smooth Lou's scheme, right? Smooth Lou often requires that center fielder that has to cover sideline to sideline. Julian Blackmon's sort of a guy that fits that bill. It's just a question of whether or not, like, how much do you value the idea of changing the guys that we have in the locker room? That's the question you have to answer when coming into an opinion, because Blackmon is the type of player that if he was not on our team last year, like if Blackmon was on a different team and we were talking about potential free agents we can bring in, we would view a guy like Julian Blackmon as a very, very, very viable option at the safety position. So that's worth noting. It's also worth noting that last year it took a long while for a deal to be made with Julian Blackmon. It felt like that took months. I obviously, off the top of my head, can't remember the exact timeline, but it was a long while. Like, a lot of things happened before Julian Blackmon ended up re-signing with the Colts. So that may not be an answer we have very quickly at safety unless they make that splash early with Javon Holland. But we're going to have to see. Again, the time where we're talking about talking is coming to an end. We're getting to that point where we're going to have the answers. And this was kind of just me spitballing some of those ideas, some of my thoughts. It's really all you could do at this juncture. Still have to touch up on the draft and some of the positions of need and talking about the guys I like. Last year, I took a lot of time doing that, and ultimately, it was a fun exercise. But at the same time, does it really matter unless they're on the Indianapolis Colts for our purpose? I don't know. You can feel free to answer that in the comment section. But that right there was an episode. Congratulations. You made it to the end. My name is Justin. This right here was and is going to be the Riding the Bench Colts podcast. Like, subscribe if you have not done so yet. And as always, go Colts.